United States Navy operates by one absolute, unspoken rule that the entire world understands. You can disagree with their politics, and you can protest their foreign policy, but you never, under any circumstances, fire a weapon at an American supercarrier. It is a geopolitical red line that has maintained global maritime peace for over 80 years. Because an aircraft carrier is not just a ship, it is a 100,000-ton floating piece of sovereign American territory. Attacking it is the exact equivalent of dropping a bomb directly on Washington, D.C., but in the dark, hostile waters near the Strait of Hormuz, an incredibly dangerous miscalculation just occurred. A heavily armed militia group, backed by the absolute limits of Iranian ballistic technology, decided to cross that line. They actually attempted to sink the USS Abraham Lincoln. To understand the absolute insanity of this attack, you have to understand the target. The Abraham Lincoln is a Nimitz-class nuclear-powered behemoth, stretching over 1,000 feet long. It carries a crew of 5,000 sailors and an air wing more powerful than most entire nations. It is the undisputed apex predator of the world's oceans. But the commanders in Yemen believed they had found a fatal flaw in its massive armor. They believed that sheer volume and hypersonic speed could overwhelm the greatest defense system on Earth. The attack did not begin with a massive declaration of war or a radio warning. It began in the pitch black of night with a swarm of cheap, deadly suicide drones. Dozens of delta-winged explosives were launched from hidden mobile racks in the Yemeni desert. They flew incredibly low to the water, skimming the waves to avoid long-range radar detection. The goal of these drones was not to sink the massive aircraft carrier. Their goal was entirely psychological and tactical, to act as a highly lethal distraction. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the screen suddenly lit up. The room is bathed in an eerie blue light, kept freezing cold to protect the massive supercomputers. Dozens of highly trained radar operators stared at their monitors as the warning alarms began to scream. Vampire, vampire, that is the chilling code word used by the US Navy to indicate an incoming hostile anti-ship weapon. The air in the command center instantly grew incredibly heavy as the tactical picture emerged. But the captain of the Abraham Lincoln did not panic. A supercarrier never travels alone. It is protected by a carrier strike group. Massive Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and Ticonderoga-class cruisers immediately moved into a defensive formation around the carrier. The destroyers unleashed a barrage of Standard Missile-2 interceptors into the night sky. The sky over the Gulf turned completely orange as the solid rocket boosters ignited. Within seconds, the cheap suicide drones were violently erased from the sky in brilliant flashes of light, but the Houthi commanders sitting in their underground bunkers were not disappointed. They knew the drones would be instantly destroyed by the American fleet, because the drones were just the bait, designed to force the American radars to look in the wrong direction. While the destroyers were busy tracking the slow-moving drones, the real attack was launched. Deep in the mountainous terrain of Yemen, heavy blast doors slid open, and a massive, solid-fueled anti-ship ballistic missile was fired directly into the stratosphere. This was not a cheap, slow-moving drone built in a garage. This was a multi-million-dollar, state-of-the-art ballistic killer designed specifically to break ships in half. It exited the Earth's atmosphere, arced over the curvature of the planet, and began its terrifying descent. As it re-entered the atmosphere, gravity and rocket motors accelerated it to Mach 5, that is over 3,800 miles per hour. At that apocalyptic speed, the kinetic energy alone is enough to utterly destroy a warship without even exploding. The radar operators on the Abraham Lincoln had exactly 90 seconds to react. If you have never been in a naval combat center, you cannot fathom the terror of a 90-second countdown. Human reflexes are completely useless against a weapon traveling at a mile per second. But this is exactly why the United States Navy invested billions of dollars into the Aegis combat system. It is an incredibly advanced artificial intelligence designed to fight wars faster than the human brain can process. The Aegis system instantly recognized the ballistic threat dropping from the edge of space. It completely ignored the remaining drones and locked all of its massive phased array radars onto the incoming missile. It calculated the trajectory, the speed, the wind resistance, and the exact point of impact, and without waiting for a human to press a button, Aegis authorized the ultimate defense protocol. A vertical launch cell on one of the escorting destroyers violently blew open, and an SM-3 interceptor missile roared out of the tube, accelerating straight up into the atmosphere. The SM-3 does not have an explosive warhead. It relies entirely on hitting a bullet with another bullet, while both are traveling at hypersonic speeds. The mathematical precision required for this interception is completely mind-bending. It is like trying to shoot a sniper rifle and hit another sniper's bullet perfectly in mid-air. High above the clouds on the absolute edge of space, the two missiles collided. The silent kinetic impact completely vaporized the Iranian-made ballistic weapon. A rain of harmless glowing metal debris fell into the dark waters of the ocean far away from the carrier. Inside the Abraham Lincoln's command center, the incoming threat icon simply blinked and vanished from the screen. For about 3 seconds, there was absolute breathless silence on the bridge. The multi-billion-dollar carrier had survived the most advanced asymmetrical attack in naval history, but the silence did not last long. Surviving an attack is not the objective of the United States military. The objective is to ensure that whoever fired that weapon completely ceases to exist. The rules of engagement had just been completely rewritten in a matter of 2 minutes. The President of the United States did not need to convene a week-long congressional hearing. The standing orders for defending an American aircraft carrier are brutally simple and devastatingly fast. The order was given by the strike group commander before the debris even hit the water. Launch the alert fighters. The flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln instantly transformed into a chaotic symphony of controlled violence. Steam catapults hissed as they built up massive crushing pressure. Deck crews in brightly colored vests sprinted across the non-slip surface in the dark. And the most advanced stealth fighters on the planet, the F-35C Lightning II, roared to life. They did not take off one at a time. They were violently launched off the bow of the ship in rapid succession, their afterburners glowing bright blue. Within minutes, a highly lethal squadron of fifth-generation fighters was airborne and turning toward Yemen. But the aircraft carrier was not the only American asset about to unleash absolute hell. The Aegis cruisers and destroyers that had just defended the fleet were now pivoting to offense. They began retargeting their vertical launch systems, switching from interceptors to something far deadlier, the BGM-109 Tomahawk land attack cruise missile. Dozens of Tomahawks were launched into the night, skimming low over the water toward the coastline. The retaliation was not going to be measured or proportional, it was going to be overwhelming. Back in Yemen, the militia commanders were staring at their own radar screens. They were waiting for the catastrophic explosion that would signal the death of an American supercarrier. Instead, their screens began lighting up with dozens of incoming American signatures. The F-35s arrived first, completely undetected by the primitive air defense networks on the ground. They were utilizing their advanced stealth capabilities to slip right past the early warning radars, and they were passing targeting coordinates directly back to the incoming Tomahawk missiles. The US forces did not just target the specific missile rack that fired the weapon. They targeted the entire command and control infrastructure of the militia group. They targeted the underground bunkers, the ammunition depots, and the communication arrays. The night sky over Yemen erupted into massive columns of fire and smoke. Bunker-busting munitions penetrated deep into the mountainsides, destroying the hidden ballistic missile reserves. The Tomahawks hit with terrifying precision, turning multi-million-dollar Iranian hardware into twisted, burning metal. In less than 45 minutes, the entire offensive capability of that specific sector was completely erased. The Houthi forces had spent years meticulously building that secret arsenal, and the United States Navy dismantled it entirely before the sun even came up. This is the terrifying reality of the instant response doctrine. It is designed to completely break the psychological will of the enemy commanders. It sends a very specific message. If you miss, you die, and if you hit, you die faster. The global geopolitical landscape watched this brief, violent exchange with absolute fascination. Rogue nations and adversarial superpowers closely analyzed every single second of the engagement. They were looking to see if the massive American aircraft carriers were finally obsolete. They wanted to know if a cheap drone swarm and a ballistic missile could actually dethrone the king of the ocean. The answer they got was a resounding, highly explosive no. The technological gap between the United States Navy and its adversaries is still astronomically wide. The Abraham Lincoln did not alter its course, and it did not retreat to a safe harbor. It continued sailing directly through the hostile waters, projecting massive power across the entire region. It is a floating, heavily armored reminder that the American military does not bluff. The era of asymmetrical warfare is getting incredibly dangerous and highly unpredictable. Enemies are gaining access to hypersonic technology and advanced swarm algorithms, but the fundamental mathematics of firepower still heavily favor the side with the nuclear-powered supercarriers. You can try to test the red line in the dark waters of the Middle East. You can try to overwhelm the Aegis combat system with pure volume, but when the smoke clears, the carrier will still be floating, and the place where you launched your missile will simply be a smoking crater. This is exactly why the Abraham Lincoln is the most feared vessel on the planet, because it doesn't just survive the storm, it absolutely becomes the storm.